guys, I'm going to show you here how today to store your equipment and take care of your engine over the winter or over the spring, summer, and fall for snowblowers and generators and things like that to make sure that they start when you need them. The first thing you want to pay real close attention to is the type of fuel you're using. If you're using ethanol blended pump fuel, stop. That's the first thing you should do. If you're doing that, you will have issues at some point because of that fuel, no matter whether you treat it or you try to stabilize it or not. Normally, that gas will go bad after 60 to 90 days at the very most, which is fine for a car or something fuel injected, but for something small like this, that is not okay. It's going to separate out like people show time and time again, and it's not going to start after sitting for short periods. We did go through some that will combat the water, Formula X2, the Phaser 3000, 2-butoxyethanol, and then the K100. Those will combat the water in the fuel, but I still don't recommend using ethanol blended fuel. Use an ethanol free fuel or a canned fuel, especially in like a blower or a trimmer or a chainsaw or something like that, that you're only going to use a few times a year. That canned fuel is going to save you a lot in repair bills versus what it would cost just to use the fuel, 2 or 3 cans a year. Maybe more depending on your use, but bring it into me once and you're going to pay a hefty bill to clean everything out, get it all back into working order, and maybe a new carb kit, whatever the case may be. Good fuel. We use ethanol free fuel, and we also treat it with Phaser 3000 just to make sure if the water gathers on the inside of the tank from temperature difference, that water stays mixed into the fuel as a solution. There are many cans out there, something like this that doesn't have a top. That's not going to be good. The air in there is constantly going to be being replaced. So when that fuel is hot and it's cold outside and that air condenses on the inside of that tank, every time the moisture or the temperature difference from the inside to the out happens, that tank on the inside is going to condense and that water is actually going to go inside your gas. Same thing for a tank that's partially empty. If it's all the way down here and it's humid out, you got all this air in here. If you leave that sit without any sort of treatment, it is going to draw the moisture out of the volume in that tank. So keep your fuel tank filled up. Also keep the tank on your snowblower or whatever else it may be filled up if you're going to leave fuel in it. On smaller equipment, we recommend running them and then actually draining them. I'll show you how to do that in 1 second. A can like this is an issue sometimes because people don't realize. This is mine. It's actually my personal can, and I left this outside this morning to show you exactly what happened to me when I went to use it one time. This is a safety can. It is not vented or anything, so it's great for keeping your fuel in, but if you leave this outside, all of that right there is water that was stored down in. I mean, that's a lot of water. That's probably 1.5 ounces of water, and a lot of people won't realize that or pay any attention to that when they're going to pour this, 3 or 4 days later. None of this is wet, and you're going to pour this into your snowblower. Well, you dump it in the tank, the first 1.5 ounces is just 100% pure water. I mean, that's insanity. I saw that happen myself with the fuel storage system that I had, and I said, wow, that's very interesting. So it is sealed and everything down in here, but that water that was stuck in here, when I took it apart last time, there was fuel on the inside and there was water in the bottom because it was sitting outside. Somehow that water made its way down into the tank. Do not leave your tank outside if it's something like this where water can gather. I see that a lot, especially if it's a tank that goes straight up. We do recommend, we love these containers. They're great. Perfectly sealed. They don't overfill. Easy release. I'll show you how to winterize this stuff. Move this water to the side. Got a Steel BG86 blower. This thing hasn't been ran in a little while. Throw this trimmer over here. Most of this stuff is exactly the same. It's going to have a primer bulb on it that you're going to need to prime to start it. We're going to fire this thing up first, and we're going to let it run for a minute to get it all warmed up and what we're gonna do is after we get it started and fired up and warmed up, we're gonna add a little bit more oil to the tank. I like to do that just so that extra oil content coats the inside of the carburetor and keeps all those gaskets fresh, as opposed to letting them dry rot without any fuel in it over the storage period. Some people will tell you if you're using a good fuel, you can leave them filled all the way up. That is also okay, but I think draining them is definitely the better option. That had some pressure in it for sure. Fire this up real quick. Let it warm up there for a minute. This doesn't have a lot of gas in it, so we're not going to add a ton of oil, but you want a good oil content. You want it to be pretty thick on the inside. I'm just gonna kind of mix that up a little bit more, and that's gonna make it smoke kind of like crazy, but all that extra oil is gonna coat the inside of the carburetor, inside of the fuel line and fuel tank, and then even once we burn that fuel off, that oil is gonna stay there and it's gonna treat all those rubber parts. Everything is coated after we've let it run. It is an extremely thick as far as what we have in it. Now we're going to dump the fuel completely out, drain it, and then we'll prime the primer bulb to get all that additional fuel out. Prime it about 10-12 times, dump it again. I'm going to do that a couple times until all this fuel is out. Shouldn't see anything in the primer bulb. You can do one of two things at this point. If you have an air compressor, you can go ahead and blow it out real easily. That helps just do it a little bit quicker. If you don't have an air compressor, you do not have to do that. What you can do is just this next step. Now we're going to choke this thing and see if we can get it to fire up again and run. If we can, we'll move it off choke, and we're going to try to keep this thing running for as long as we can to burn everything off in this system. It looks like. A lot of times they will stay running for quite a while, especially if you don't blow them out. It looks like I did a pretty good job of getting everything out of there. All of this additional oil content is up through, that's coated the inside of the tank and the inside of the carburetor, and this thing is ready for storage. Nothing is going to happen that's going to prevent this or add anything to this to make the thing not start come spring. I like to leave the fuel tank just a little bit broken, not loose completely, but just barely snug. That way the air can move from the inside to the outside of the tank. That way it's not trapped in there and it doesn't gather moisture. I see that happen even with just the smallest bit of fuel or the smallest bit of oil in them sometimes. Same process on this as it is on any generator out there. You know, you've got a primer bulb, any chainsaw out there, you've got a primer bulb on each one. If it doesn't have a primer bulb, obviously you're not going to prime it to do that. You're just going to choke it to try to keep it started and try to get as much of that out of the carburetor as you can if it does not have the primer bulb. Otherwise, whether it's a blower or a trimmer or it's a backpack blower or anything like that, it's the same process as what this is. You'll want that to have additional oil in it. Some people like to use fuel treatment at a very high rate. If that's your thing, put fuel treatment in it instead. Do that, run it for a few minutes, coat the inside, put it away for the year. That's on any of your 2-cycle and 2-stroke stuff. Anything that has gas oil mix is going to be that process. If it's something that doesn't have a gas oil mix, that has a different oil reservoir than where the gas is, what we will want to do is one of two things. You can drain the carburetor completely like that if you'd like. Some of them have nice drains on the side of the carburetor bowl, something like this, where on the side you can drain the carburetor right out from the bottom. Well, that's great. If you can drain everything from the entire system, make sure it has no fuel in it, that'll work perfectly. Unfortunately, there are a lot of carburetors on different things that they don't have that. All they have is one bowl at the bottom. Even if you run it out of fuel, you've still got some that's going to sit in the bottom of your carburetor. Well, how do you get that out of there? It's either you actually drop the bowl, which a lot of people don't want to do that. Drop the bowl and clean it out. Otherwise, you're going to leave fuel in it and you're going to leave it filled all the way up. That way the fuel doesn't go bad, moisture doesn't gather, and carburetor doesn't gum up. If you're using ethanol-free fuel, you're already halfway there. Something to combat moisture is going to be great. Anything with that 2-butoxyethanol in it should work wonderfully. And then there's a bunch of different ones, depending on, some generators and riding mowers, they've got a drain off to the side, and some have a carburetor similar to this that doesn't have a drain at all. It just depends on your equipment. I'll show you a few different ones in the way that we do these. Snowblower or something of that nature, they're going to have a carburetor right down underneath the choke, no matter the model, straight down, and you'll want to take this one off at a 45-degree angle to drain all the fuel if you're going to drain it. This is a commercial X-Mark mower. If you're wanting to drain this, that's great. It's got a fuel shut-off in line. A lot of people will shut them off and run the fuel dry in the carburetor. Again, problem is, still fuel in the bottom of the carburetor if that happens. This, you can take the bottom nut off and drain the carburetor completely pretty easily because it's accessible. Many others aren't nearly that accessible or easy to drain. Some of the carburetors on the generators are similar. There's an easy drain on the side where you can drain the whole system. If you're looking at the carburetor and you don't see a bolt in the bottom other than the one straight up through, if you don't see one off to the side, there's probably not a drain on it. 4-stroke, 4-cycle stuff. If it's easy enough to drain them, do that. Drain them if you want to keep them dry. If you don't want to mess with all that, you can leave them filled all the way to the top. Little as space as possible in the fuel tank you want. A lot of them, again, with plastic carburetors or carburetors that aren't easy to remove, to drain everything out of, draining all the fuel or running the fuel out is not going to solve your issues because they're still going to have that fuel left over. These we've got all the way filled up. They are ready as far as winterization goes, except for one thing. The last thing I like to do once I have the fuel and everything all stabilized in them and these 4 cycles is I like to fog them. Stabil fogging oil. What this does, as it says, coats internal engine components, lubricates and protects cylinders. It's for all 2 and 4 cycle engines. I don't use it on the 2-cycle stuff because I'm using extra oil in there to coat everything as opposed to using this in the intake. What we do for this is we'll remove the air filter cover from each. Start with the generator. And we will start this. So let's close the choke. We like to spray a very liberal amount as it's running into the intake. Some people like for it to completely die when that happens. It is very well ventilated in here. Don't worry about that. The next one's going to be the lawnmower, and it'll be the same thing that we do there. You have to be very careful when doing this if you're not going to have someone help you, as we usually use a clamp in order to keep the lawnmower running. Oh, this one's actually got the blade brake clutch, so that's nice and easy, which means the blade doesn't spin. All this is done on generators and on snowblowers. We really see it a lot where it happens where the valves get stuck because they're sitting and get just a little tiny bit of moisture on the valve stem. Same thing with snowblowers that we do with generators to winterize them and make sure that they start the next year and that you don't have any issues. On a snowblower where it's not real easy to get to the air filter, what we do is we'll look for the breather tube that's on the valve cover. If it doesn't have a valve cover where the breather tube's easy to get to, if it's like a 2-cycle or something like that, you're gonna have to find a way to get to the air intake. That lubricated this entire system. Both of those valves are lubed up. All of the cylinder and the piston are all lubed up. It's going to make sure that no rust forms on there while it sits for here the winter and there the summer, spring, and the fall. With treated gas in them and with a nice lubricated head in both of these instances, whether it's a 2-cycle or a 4-cycle, this will take care of it, and this will ensure that it starts on first or second pull next year, as opposed to messing with it and having to deal with a carburetor issue or something else going on. To winterize a riding mower or a commercial mower or a zero-turn or anything, it's exactly the same process. Most of these carburetors are not easy to drain from the bottom, so most people will leave them filled up. This has got fuel in it that is ethanol free, it's treated, it's ready to go for the winter, and in order to put this away, what we like to do is we like to take the air cleaner out, just like on the other ones. Make sure all that's cleaned out so you don't pull anything down into it. And we're gonna run this, and as soon as we get it warmed up and everything, fogging oil will go into it. If you had bad gas in your unit before, or had ethanol blended fuel in your tank and you didn't drain it all, you can try to add additive, but that's not nearly as good as using the ethanol free with the additive in it. You can see it smoking from the exhaust and everything. That tells you, you know, pretty easily that it's gotten all up into where it needed to go. Again, it has to be a liberal amount, otherwise it doesn't coat everything on the inside, and you should see some good smoke coming off of it to know that your fogging oil is working correctly. This thing, once we get it put back together, will be ready for this customer to use come spring. In closing, whenever you're going to winterize or put a piece of equipment away for storage, you're going to want to make sure that the fuel system is completely dry and coated if it's a 2-cycle piece of equipment, or if you're going to drain the fuel tank and the lines in the carburetor. Make sure it's completely drained, there's nothing left over. Otherwise, if you're going to leave it filled up, you'll want a good quality ethanol-free treated fuel. And you'll want that filled all the way to the top. Especially in like a generator, there's a big chance for a large volume of air to condense and cause water in the bottom of your fuel tank. When that happens, that water starts to interact with the metal starts to rust, which interacts with the gas, and it's a vicious cycle. Every time you fill it up, it happens more and more. Take those steps that were given in this video, and that'll help you prevent these things from even happening in the first place. You won't have these issues when you go to start your equipment come spring. Hopefully these things have helped you out. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.